Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 348, Your Victory Over Self-Reliance. How reliance reverses the damage of self-reliance within your mind. The podcast objectives are: reveal the only way you can eliminate self-reliance, reveal the process in which reliance eliminates self-reliance, and analyze how reliance reverses the damage of self-reliance. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. The least complicated war you will fight. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 96 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we completed a two-part intro to reliance, the critical degree of faith, and the final mile we travel in our victory over doubt. As with hope and trust, there is much more I could say about reliance. And yet, I must move forward with my remit. I must show you how reliance, i.e., the critical degree of faith, defeats self-reliance, i.e., the critical degree of doubt. We should start by considering the table to the right, recapping what we have learned about reliance. The primary objective of reliance is to stand upon the promises the Father has given us until they come to fruition. And by definition, reliance is having full dependence upon someone or something based upon experience, repose of mind upon what is deemed sufficient support or authority. Now, as you have likely gathered, having full dependence in Elohim to the point where you confidently stand upon each and every one of his promises should not be a difficult undertaking. Here is why. Hope and trust have already eliminated despair and distrust from your thought dimension. In doing so, these two leading degrees of faith have not only reversed the vast majority of the damage doubt has done within your mind, but they have also defeated and eliminated the first of the 7 greatest enemies you will face in your quest. Like two bosses, hope and trust took out yourself and all the trash that came with him or her. For that reason, the war between reliance and self-reliance is the least complicated war you will fight as it pertains to your overarching campaign against doubt. Again, here is why. By eliminating yourself, it becomes impossible for you to walk in the ways of self-reliance. To wit, you cannot rely on someone or something that no longer exists. This matter lends itself to a crucial nature concerning all the sequences of the degrees of holiness. And seeing as we will revisit this nature for every degree, I will submit it to you now in the form of a treasure box. Your mastery of the fundamental and focal degrees of any degree of holiness will dynamically result in the manifestation of the critical degree. Accordingly, our mastery of hope and trust, i.e., the leading degrees of faith, will automatically translate into reliance, i.e., the critical degree of faith. The equation is as thus: hope plus trust equals reliance. Likewise, seeing as all the degrees of lawlessness are adjacent to all the degrees of holiness, the inverse of this principle must also be true. To wit, this same rule applies to all the degrees of lawlessness. Consider this: your elimination of the fundamental and focal degrees of any level or interval of lawlessness will dynamically result in the elimination of the critical degree. On this wise, your victory over despair and distrust automatically translates into a victory over self-reliance. And this is why your war with self-reliance will be the least complicated war you fight in your overarching campaign against doubt. Lead me to the rock. Now, these things being what they are, your war with self-reliance is not centered on eliminating yourself as an antagonist, seeing as he or she has already been eliminated. Quite the contrary, your war with self-reliance is centered on eliminating the adverse effects and influences self has left behind, namely, the few which were not addressed by hope or trust. You can see these clearly by observing the diagram to the right, which we analyzed in the most recent podcast. It reveals the positive impact of hope and trust in your thought dimension. It also reveals the only faculties within your thought dimension which are not perfectly ordered by the Spirit and aligned with the precepts of faith. Enter your memory and your subconscious. Now, your subconscious is a wild card and a persistent danger to your mental well-being. And thus, faith is one of many degrees of holiness, which establishes a safeguard to ensure your subconscious is constantly purged and governed by the Spirit. This brings us to your memory. This faculty is also a wild card, and it, like many of the faculties within your thought dimension, was manipulated by yourself. To wit, self is the causer of your intense focus on many of your bad memories. This is why many will often say, leave your bad memories behind. It's because these memories can plague your mind in a most terrible way. This is where reliance comes into play. To wit, its primary illustration in your quest for holiness. In this regard, reliance is a rock, but not just any rock. Consider this: as all the degrees of holiness retain characteristics of the Spirit of Elohim, they also retain characteristics of Yahushua, Messiah. For this cause, reliance is a critical facet of Yahushua's personage, namely, his assuredness as the chief cornerstone of our faith. This is why reliance is not just any rock. Brothers and sisters, reliance is a microcosm of the chief cornerstone of our faith. Accordingly, and quite appropriately, reliance is a rock of ages and for all ages. For we know we can rely on Yahushua Messiah as our faithful high priest concerning all matters pertaining to Elohim and man. Therefore, when we are overwhelmed in any situation where our hope and trust are firm, but they are being tried by painful memories, the Spirit of Elohim will lead us to the rock that is higher than I, a rock who will stick closer than any brother and on whom we can rely. Psalm 61, 1 through 4 reveals, hear my cry, O Elohim. Listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth, I call unto you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been my refuge, a strong tower in the face of the enemy. Let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge in the shelter of your wings. Selah. We still have a long way to go. Now, this passage references situations beyond the conflict we often experience with our memories. Vis-a-vis, it also addresses instances of spiritual warfare in which our enemies will attempt to overwhelm us with a wide range of spiritual and physical assails. This speaks to a key nature of the critical degrees of holiness and lawlessness, which you must appreciate as you labor to obtain the seal of Elohim. Consider this. Although every sequence of the secondary degrees of lawlessness and holiness are illustrated by a series of battles, the war between the primary degrees are determined by those battles between the critical degrees of lawlessness and holiness. Therefore, even though the wars we fight against the critical degrees of lawlessness are the most straightforward, they are also the most violent and distressing. Along these lines, the war between faith and doubt is determined by who wins the war between reliance and self-reliance. And seeing as this will be a stressful battle, I will share with you your key to victory, revealing how you will succeed and how you could fail. Whereas reliance causes us to stand on the promises of Elohim, leaning unto him to order our steps and to provide for us. Self-reliance causes us to believe we don't need the Father to provide because we are intent on providing for ourselves. All the while, we are disqualifying ourselves from receiving many blessings. Brothers and sisters, here lies the key. To wit, the only way you can lose your war with self-reliance is if you foolishly break off the path of hope and trust you have been following, and you allow yourself to re-enter the equation. Now, I wish I could say this is an uncommon turn of events, but I can't, because it is untrue. Alas, the scriptures and history are filled with the tragic examples of men and women who did run well, and yet they were fatally deceived by the seductive spirit of self-reliance. The key word is seductive, because many who fell prey to self-reliance were not operating in a spirit of doubt or disobedience. Quite the contrary. These individuals were deceived. They were tricked into believing a lie. Now, the question of the hour is, how will you succeed when so many who have come before us have failed? The answer lies in the primary illustration of reliance, that is, a rock. Remember, As we continue to walk in the ways of hope and trust, these leading degrees of faith will dynamically create a rock within our minds that we can always stand on. This rock then becomes the answer to every test and trial we will ever face. This is precisely why our thought dimension at this juncture will have achieved optimal health, as you can see by the image to the right. To wit, there is no more red in the diagram. Quite the contrary, all the mental faculties and actors within your thought dimension are now color coded in green, orange, and blue. Here again, this represents optimal health. Look, this is what happens when you allow hope and trust become translated into reliance. And this is how you will resist the seducing spirits which the enemy has sent out to deceive. For look, what part of your thought dimension can they compromise? What faculty are they going to enter? What actor are they going to mislead? The answer is sure. There is none. For in the spiritual sphere, a healthy man or woman who is progressively healthy cannot be compromised. It is a non-starter. True, there is a lot of work that goes into being progressive in your spiritual health, and it is something you can only do if you succeed in unlocking the power of reliance. Notwithstanding, as amazing and promising as this development is, we still have a long way to go in freeing your mind from the damaging effects of lawlessness. We're on our way, but we still have a long way to go. And you must appreciate how we still have a long way to go. Now, here is the final word. We crushed the spirit of defiance by getting rid of self-reliance. Brothers and sisters, we have 70 plus degrees of lawlessness we must still address. And yet, I must say, your victory over self-reliance is one of the more critical victories you will obtain in this quest. I am quite sure that you, by the Spirit, can see why, upon everything we have shared in the most recent podcast. And so I will leave you with a final word of advice. When the way is dark and dreary, and your fainting heart grows weary, there is one on whom you can rely. He will turn your night to day. Just stand your ground and say, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on all the lessons you have heard this week and ask the Father to give you clarity on anything you are struggling to receive. And if you are led, please feel free to reach out to me. You can fill out a form on our website and let us know what questions you have. And remember, the only question that can truly hurt you is the one you fail to ask. Last but not least, enjoy the upcoming Shabbat and the weekend, and be ready to get back at it next week as we continue to make our calling and election sure in pursuit of the precious and priceless seal of Elohim. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 348, Your Victory Over Self-Reliance. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 350, Life After Your Victory Over Doubt. I will post this podcast on Monday, October 7th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.